Good morning, ladies, gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear students. Welcome to this session devoted to the reflection on career and skills for the labor market of the future, organized in this context of the 20th Bologna process anniversary. As a matter of fact, it is important to have the capacity to share reflection and experiences both on the value of higher education as well as the role and the impact of higher education on this moving and evolving society. We have this morning two keynote speeches, and at the end, we will have a sequence of question-answer with the speaker and have a discussion between us. The first speaker is Agneta Bladh. Agneta is the Vice President of the Council of the Magna Carta Observatory. And I can't summarize the different positions she holds in a higher education system, both in Sweden as well as at European level. Agneta was a rector of University of Kalmar, which is now a part of Linnaeus University in Sweden. Between February 24 and December 29, from 1998 to 24, she served as a state secretary at the Swedish Ministry of Education and Science, responsible for higher education and research. In this role, she was one of the signatories of the Bologna Declaration. Actually, it seems very important and symbolic to start with Agneta. She holds, as I said, a lot of various positions, and she holds a PhD political science from Stockholm University in 1988. Agneta, you have the floor.
Thank you, Jean-Pierre. Yes, I wanted to start with a look backwards. Though this seminar is about to look in the future, but I would like to remind us a bit about the labor market and the demands from the labor market and the Bologna process. Because when preparing this speech, I talked to all colleagues and also to people who are now active in the Bologna follow-up group. And no, they are not discussing the labor market, especially much. They are discussing a lot of other things. So why the Bologna? Oh, you need to. Can you hear me over there? You do, okay. But this might be better. Well, we know that, among these four reasons why we had the Bologna process. But to me, it is also about something that is not written. I believe that many countries, especially in continental Europe, but also neighbors of Sweden, wanted a restructure of higher education in order to meet the demands of the labor market. The first cycle degrees were very, very long, 4 to 5 years, and they wanted a scheme with a bachelor of 3, perhaps 4 years. We already had that in Sweden, so to me it was nothing new, but our neighbors didn't have that. And I was convinced when meeting my colleague as state secretary in Rome before the first ministerial meeting in Prague, where there was a true view that this was a way forward to transfer the higher education institutions in some kind of direction that was different from the current situation at those times, and to do that together with others. So they needed some kind of modernization, more oriented towards the requirement in the labor market, but it was a structure that was in focus, and this was to be more alike. But also a redesign of curricula with learning outcomes in focus, as well as student-centered learning. And the word lifelong learning was very important and still is. Also, what kind of students are approached to reach other students than the traditional and have a more diversified student population. The ministerial meetings during these 20 years have focused different issues, and you can see them here. I won't go into detail to them, but they have had these meetings every second year, and most meetings have been dealt with these issues. How about the labor market demands? Well, the word employability was there from the beginning. It was a reaction towards that word in parts of the higher education sector. I remember the students in Sweden, they said, well, we want to use the word usability instead, because we want to be prepared for a labor market also that does not exist just now, but might be there in the coming years. So employability was one word, perhaps not so much discussed. It was a question of increase the programs in the STEM fields, science, technology, engineering, and math. It was about the lifelong learning possibilities, which I already told you, and multidisciplinary approaches in curricula is always something that especially politicians come to discuss. But parallel to this, after some years, it was also a modernization agenda in the EU structure. And very much so, how you learn, how you teach. I was member of a high-level group modernization of higher education in the EU structure. And it was very much about learning, the students' learning process, but also about tackling the future skills mismatches and how to include digital competences. During those years, it was a debate, should we reduce the number of universities in Europe to 5, 10? Do we need universities when we have MOOCs and other things that could be used by students instead? Well, some of us didn't believe in that. But back to the issue of employability and usability. we have to remember that higher education institutions, they are there not just to adapt to the labor market. They are there in order to influence the labor market. And that's why we have research-based education. But nevertheless, there is a skills gap. And some of us are remembered by this from the business sector, not least, many, many times during the years. There is a gap between supply and demand of higher education trained people, especially in certain areas as the STEM fields, but also in others. It could be in the health sector, it could be the need of teachers in primary and secondary school. So the gaps exist both locally, regionally, and nationally. And there is also a digital gap that is especially challenging, and how to tackle the existing skills mismatches, but also the future mismatches. The digital gap is, well, I go back, can say something about that. I think we have relaxed a little about that. It's not just about to have new special knowledge from the engineering or ICT field. It's also about how you adapt to new digital instruments. And that is so in almost all sectors. And this is perhaps the most challenging, and why also lifelong learning is so important. And it's up to people themselves to find out, because there are no solutions ready. They have to influence the development of the labor market themselves. But I read a book recently in Sweden that talked about this digital skills gap and artificial intelligence. There are also other skills which I will come back to that is important. For instance, to have good collaboration, to have the ability to collaborate in a smaller or larger group. So what kind of competences do we need in a globalized world? Well, we, of course, need skills that enhancing the employability of our students. We need language skills. We always talk about that in Europe. But there is not so good foresights, I think. It is often the mother tongue and English, not more languages, which we should need, actually. But we hope for the future. I'm a bit pessimistic, though. We need transversal skills. Sometimes we call them generic skills, which might be connected both to the field of study, but also generally. And we need international and intercultural skills. And I come back to this. Which are the transversal skills? Well, the ability to communicate, both orally, but also in written form. The analytic skills, the ability to critical reflections, all these that we normally train in higher education, not least when it comes to writing thesis. We need the ability to think in new directions, and that is sometimes called entrepreneurial skills, which is not identical, but they are very nearby. We need students with ability to plan their work and have ability to make decisions. The international and intercultural skills are the same transversal skills applicable to an international context. You have to be open-minded. You have to be aware of cultural differences. You have to have an intercultural understanding. And there also adaptability to new situations, prepared to see new perspectives, and also prepared to work in an international setting. As our societies are more and more heterogeneous, we also need students with these skills inside our own societies. Sweden, for instance, is nowadays a very heterogeneous society, and for teachers and people who work in the health sector, it is necessary, actually, to have these skills in order to understand what they meet daily in the work. But also new solutions are proposed. There was a call recently about European universities. This is quite outside the Bologna process. This initiative is a part of what the European Union calls the European education area, which also includes higher ed. And the European universities are supposed to be a linkage between the local needs and the national needs, but also the European needs. Its aims are strengthen and deepen the recognition and mobility, the mobility both of students and of staff. And it's a focus on inclusion, to have different kinds of students, to have a variety of background of students, to also focus on lifelong learning, and to focus on the demands of the civic society. There is a focus on entrepreneurial approaches and innovation in a broad sense. And these new European universities are supposed to have a long-term cooperation. And perhaps this week or next, we will know which will be the first European universities. So we had the Bologna Declaration 20 years ago, which was an instrument to refresh higher education in different countries in Europe in order to modernize and make higher education more in line with the requirement of the labor market, even though it isn't those words there. 20 years later in Europe, we have this initiative, European Universities, which is an instrument to contribute to the competitiveness of European universities by wide cooperation between 5 to 8 institutions, which cover student, staff, curriculum design, innovation, and other societal interaction programs. It's about inclusiveness to the neighboring societies and about governance. So, with these words, I would like to thank you, and a little glance into the future, what will be in the next 20 years. Thank you.